Today, I'm once again reporting on California. This is hot off the press this morning. Audit reveals inconsistencies in cannabis permitting process in Santa Barbara and other California counties. In a recent audit conducted by the California State Auditor, the permitting process for cannabis businesses in various areas were evaluated with several issues found. The audit reviewed 6 regions, including Santa Barbara, Monterey, Fresno, Sacramento, San Diego, South Lake Tahoe, and these areas were selected because of their geographical diversity, comparatively large and small populations, high number of state licenses versus low number, and a variety of permitting processes. Santa Barbara County specifically has the highest number of active licenses in this group and one of the lowest total sales per the report. As of 2022, the report states Santa Barbara had a total of over 2,000 active licenses, with the unincorporated county population of about 140,000, making the population per state license 67 and a total number of sales in excess of 16 million. In contrast, Monterey County had only 532 licenses with a population just north of 100,000, garnering over 17.5 million in sales. And Sacramento had 334 licenses with 500,000 in population and earned 62 million. The findings shed light on inconsistencies and deficiencies in ensuring fairness and preventing conflicts of interest, thereby highlighting the significant control that local jurisdictions have over the regulation of cannabis businesses. The audit found that local jurisdictions did not always include several best practices in their permitting policies that help to ensure fairness and prevent conflicts of interest, abuse, and favoritism. Only 2 of the local jurisdictions used blind scoring of applications, wherein the identities of the applicants are kept from those reviewing and scoring applications, and 4 of the local jurisdictions did not require that all individuals involved in reviewing applications agree to impartiality statements. Though California voters legalized the non-medical use of cannabis, the resulting state law ensures that local jurisdictions retain significant control over the authorization and regulation of cannabis businesses within their jurisdiction. The audit makes recommendations and identifies best practices to bolster the public's confidence in the fairness and transparency of the permitting process. Blind scoring and impartiality. Out of the jurisdictions reviewed, only 2, Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe, required blind scoring of applicants, which helps prevent further preferential treatment towards certain applicants by keeping their identities hidden from evaluators. 4 of the reviewed jurisdictions, including Santa Barbara, do not require individuals involved in the reviewing application to agree to impartiality statements, which the audit states is the best practice for reducing the risk of conflicts of interest between evaluators and applicants. Santa Barbara County contracted with a third party for the initial review of applications. It included in its contract a conflict of interest clause that states that the contractor agrees that it presently has no employment or interest and shall not acquire any employment or interests that would affect their impartiality. But in addition, Santa Barbara County indicated that local jurisdiction staff who were responsible for ranking the final application and performing site inspections had discussed the importance of impartiality with the county's legal counsel, after which staff verbally affirmed their impartiality. Verbally affirmed. Therefore, the local jurisdiction had not considered further requiring the staff to sign an impartiality. Dale can tell us whether that verbal is the same as the contract when I'm done reading the article. Nevertheless, in any process that requires impartiality or that may be susceptible to bias, it is important to consider and implement safeguards, such as using impartiality statements to prevent undue influence and strengthen confidence in the integrity of the process, the audit reported. Policy and background checks. All local jurisdictions will have to have inconsistently documented whether they followed their policies and procedures when ensuring background checks. The majority of the applicants that should have received background checks in Santa Barbara did not receive them. Santa Barbara didn't require the department that oversees cannabis to document evidence that each individual had passed the background checks, resulting in its permitting of 11 of 13 applicants when they reviewed that didn't have a final verification and didn't include checking the documentation from the sheriff's office, which did do background checks. Permitting processing times. This is a big one. Although Santa Barbara County included in its ordinance a required time frame for processing applications, that jurisdiction had some of the longest application processing times among the applications, although one of the most lenient. Ordinance limit the maximum number of retail permits and limits other permit types by acreage, issued permits as long as there are no grounds for denial. Cannabis Equity Act. Under the California Cannabis Equity Act, local equity programs adopted or operated by a local jurisdiction focus on the inclusion and support of individuals and communities in the industry who are linked to populations or neighborhoods that were negatively or disproportionately impacted by cannabis criminalization. Although the California Cannabis Equity Act defined what constitutes a local equity program, it does not require that local jurisdictions conduct an equity assessment or develop an equity program, although they do receive money if they do that. That's my commentary, not the article. So they told us that Santa Barbara County doesn't currently plan to develop an equity program, and the public has not voiced a specific concern about it. So that's not true. The public, and especially within the industry, large vocal constituents have been voicing that concern. So that's not exactly accurate. The audit report highlights the significant control that local jurisdictions maintain over the regulation of cannabis businesses and the crucial need for consistency and fairness in their permitting process. While the findings indicate deficiencies across the 6 reviewed jurisdictions, they also provide an opportunity to reassess and enhance the permitting practice to align with best practices and regulatory requirements. In a written response, Santa Barbara acknowledged the value in considering some best practices as it assesses and enhances its permitting process. So I could go on, but really this article took Santa Barbara specifically to task. And Santa Barbara acknowledged the deficiencies. Acknowledging the deficiency can be a step in correcting deficiencies, but isn't the same as making those changes. This is Yarrow Kubrin, High at 9 News, Wednesday, April 17th. I'd like to know what my other guests and panelists think.
I mean, they're not
local control.
Yeah, they're not going to take anyone's license away for this or tell everyone they have to close down because of any of this. But
I think it's all designed intentionally this way, right? It allows them to do their little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Yes, this is an impartial process, and provide licenses to who they want. I would make the argument that implementing those best practices in a way that does blind scoring of applications and requires impartiality and disclosures of conflict of interest or recusal if there's a conflict of interest actually contributes more to creating an equitable landscape for licensees than creating a statutory requirement or some specific social equity program. By making the playing field more level and reducing the potential bias that could be involved with the license process, I think that is creating more accessibility. But I'm open to any counterpoints on that.
As we move closer to federal legalization, I'd like to start the movement to stop doing social equity altogether, because it's gonna be deemed unconstitutional. So why don't you just take these tax dollars and put a portion of that towards reparations?
I think it only gets deemed unconstitutional if it identifies people by immutable characteristics such as race, but not if it identifies people based on disproportionately impacted areas. But I saw Dale's eye roll there, and I'm wondering whether that was because you were winking at your sweetheart or you had a different perspective.
But here's the thing, Yarrow. Like, it was specifically, and even going back to the Nixon tapes, specifically policing these neighborhoods because of race. So if it's specifically the specific damages were done because of race, and these people, because of their race, were targeted. And you can't push
the hippies and the beatniks were not a race, and they were also targeted in those tapes. So it was political dissidents, people who were against the Vietnam War. It did include racial groups.
It was the N-words, the hippies, the Jews. Yeah, he didn't say Jews, but he explicitly said that because they were protesting war, and this is where the targeting specifically began, and it metastasized since then. So if you can go back and you can see where these people, and because of their skin color, they were targeted. These people, because of their skin color and their give them a cut of that money, man. Cut that check. That's it.
Well, the problem is the equal protection provision of the 14th Amendment. That's where all this falls apart, okay? Because you're not allowed, as Yarrow said, immutable characteristics. We call these important groups that have been recognized, and that's race is the big one, okay? Because we all know, I was in high school when they targeted hippies and dissidents from the war for marijuana and the blacks for heroin. Well, cross-pollinated a lot of ways now, and we're stuck with that. But we have a fault-based system. So if you have a particular problem and you think somebody else caused that problem to you, our system affords you a remedy if it's in time. So they've got to go look at those particular issues. Because going back and saying this particular group was mistreated, which it actually was, and then who's responsible for it, it creates more problems than you can even imagine, and they're based upon race, and that's where this Supreme Court is just going to shut it down.